Hey everybody, just Duet here. We just came back from our very first music tour.
Woo!
Woo! And it was really great.
Yeah.
I think we had a good time with our performances and just kind of living the life on the road.
By life he means like a week.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So the tour itself was like a week long.
Yeah, it was a mini tour. I'm not sure how many dates and cities you really need to be a full tour. But I mean, for us, since we live in Austin and our tour was in the Midwest, we did a date in Dubuque at Clark University, we did one at Phyllis's Musical Inn in Chicago, and we did one in Indianapolis at the art gallery Hoi Polloi.
Yeah, and these were actually 3 different types of spaces that we performed in. We performed in a concert hall or recital hall, a bar, and an art gallery.
Yeah, so 3 very different spaces with mostly the same program, and so we thought it'd be fun to maybe share with you guys here. We obviously are not experts, we're not claiming to be experts with only one tour under our belt, but we wanted to share with you some things that we learned and maybe some tips for when you're planning a tour as classical musicians. A lot of these tips are probably specific or unique to contemporary classical musicians, but some of them more generally could be for a musician of any genre.
So we both compiled our own lists of things that we thought about, and we have not shared it with each other, so we're going to kind of just go back and forth live.
Yeah, so we don't know what the other person wrote down. So I'm sure there's some overlap, but let's just see what we got.
Okay.
So I think the most obvious one, I'm sure it's yours too, but plan early. Start planning and contacting venues very, very early.
Yes. This is something that we, and probably like even me specifically, since all the shows, pretty much all the shows that we played, Cynthia set up with our contacts and stuff. This is something that we did not do as well this time because kind of our life and work got in the way a little bit, and we didn't put tour planning like on top priority.
Right. I mean, we work very, very full-time jobs outside of planning a tour. So a lot of the things that we had set out to do early on got left until way too late. But there's a caveat to this as well. It depends on the kind of venue that you're trying to play at.
Right. If you are looking to have solid money come out of the tour, you're probably going to want to hit places like universities, places that have a budget for this kind of stuff.
Or festivals, if you're playing on a festival circuit.
Or festivals. So those types of places, they want to know well in advance, and they're booking acts like years out. So that first tip is to try to contact those types of programs a year in advance at least.
At least.
To make sure that they still have money in their budget. But if you're doing bars and stuff...
Right. If you're trying to book at a bar, if you contact them a year in advance, they're going to tell you to f*** off because they don't book that far ahead. So what I would recommend, and something that was suggested to us a few times as well, start with the places where you are most likely to get money. Book those shows first, and then fill in the gaps in your schedule with other smaller venues as you get closer to the date. Things like bars, maybe art galleries, spaces that aren't specific maybe to music. To
kind of go along with that, one of the things I wrote in conjunction with that on mine is if you're kind of in our situation where it's a little late to try and get money out of universities, then you can also anchor your venues in places where you know people. We kind of took a sort of half and half approach here. We contacted friends that we had in Chicago and Indianapolis and set up shows with them since they had a local presence. And then I did a lot of cold emailing to venues that were recommended to us along the way. The places where we knew people worked out much better. The long and short of it is you're always better off booking in places where you know people, maybe splitting a bill with someone else you know in the area who's also a musician, because then you benefit from bringing in their audience base as well, especially if it's somewhere that maybe you have not developed a strong following yet. So that's the most obvious one. What's next on your list? One thing I wrote down is it's really wise to create a budget for your tour. Right. If you go in too late and you don't plan in a way that you're going to make a lot of money, the best thing you can do is try just to not lose a lot of money. Right. So we didn't necessarily talk about a budget specifically, but
our budget was as little as possible.
Right. We're pretty budget conscious people in our regular lives, so we tried to spend as little things as possible. So that means that instead of eating out at restaurants every night, we were going to the grocery store and making sure that we were buying like bulk meal stuff that we could make at places that we were staying.
Right. So either getting an Airbnb that has a kitchen and cooking in the Airbnb, or if you're staying with friends, you can get groceries and cook in their kitchen. And then also as a thank you to them, make them some dinner. Make them some food.
Yeah.
It's still less than eating out.
Ultimately, what our biggest expenses were gas, because we drove the entire way, and then the Airbnbs that we stayed at, collectively.
We don't know anyone yet that we could stay with in Arkansas or in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. But if we did, we maybe would have been able to get those costs down even a little bit more. One thing I think we did really well was to plan extra days in between stuff, so we weren't traveling 8 hours and then jumping out of the car to go play a show. So that was something I thought we did quite well, actually. I put down, okay, so this is one that maybe is specific to our instrumentation, but if you're someone who's maybe a percussionist or someone who plays multiple instruments, this could apply to you. Plan a static setup. Like, just before you go, plan a static setup. A lot of spaces, especially bars, they have really tiny stage areas. And if you have to be moving stands around and moving cables and changing out your drums or switching out your instruments between every single piece, it adds so much extra time and it's really boring for the audience. So as much as possible, either have one instrumentation that you stick with for a set, especially if you're doing a set in a small space, or plot it out so you've got different like performance stations set up that don't need to be torn down until the very end of the show. So you're just moving quickly from one to the other.
Yeah, that was a note, is just like research the space and the venue and stuff. And then decide like your repertoire from there. There are a lot of DIY spaces that don't have things like electronics and stuff. Yeah,
so know what the tech availability is where you're going, if that applies to you. Going along with knowing your space and planning a static setup, if you are playing in not a concert hall on your tour, make sure you bring just a butt ton of stand lights, or even better, do as much of your program from memory as possible. Having a lot of stands kind of creates this barrier between you and your audience, so whenever possible, try to do as much of your program from memory as you can. The other thing, relating to accommodations, be really strategic with your accommodations, especially if you have a lot of really expensive equipment. So if you've got lots of electronics or you've got a lot of drums and it's not like a flute you can put in your pocket and just go inside and you're good. We planned as much as we could to stay with friends or friends' families or Airbnbs that were in out-of-the-way safe areas so that we could minimize the number of nights where we had to completely unload our car inside the house with us in order for our stuff to be safe. So we stayed in a really remote part of like the woods in Kansas. But it was great because that meant we could leave our car loaded and there was nobody around to mess with it. And then in Indianapolis we stayed with some friends who kind of live out in the country and we were able to leave stuff in there. And it saved us a ton of time and a lot of worrying. So if you're going to be playing in cities and you're worried about that, consider staying outside of the city if you've got a lot of stuff. Related to what you were saying about having your electronics in multiple formats, so we had some pieces that had static electronics on it, like as backing tracks, and so we had them loaded onto a foot pedal so we could cue them up, but we also had them on a laptop, on a hard drive, on a CD, so whatever the tech that was available in the space we were playing in, we had a solution for how we were going to be able to play it. So relating to that, at universities especially, don't be afraid to reach out to whoever your lighting, sound, video person is going to be at the actual recital. Like, reach out to them well in advance. Let them know exactly what your needs are going to be. Send them an annotated program with every transition, everything you need done. And don't be afraid to request to meet with them before the actual recital. Because oftentimes it's these undergrad kids and they're used to showing up and like they press record because it's just a solo flute on a stage for 45 minutes. And so sometimes they're not always equipped on the fly to handle really tech heavy, like interdisciplinary setups. And that means not just like 30 minutes before doors open, but like maybe earlier in the day before, or just like touch base with them and make sure they got your program and they can do everything that you're asking.
Yeah. I guess succinctly put, don't be afraid to be proactive and just like really stay in touch with these people. Is that all you have?
Yeah. Oh, wait, no. I have one more tip. Save your receipts, yo.
Ah, yeah. I forgot to write that. I forgot to make that point. Yeah. If you're like sort of freelance, self-employed musicians like us, save everything. Save all your receipts so you can deduct that on your taxes.
Work-related expenses.
Yes,
yeah.
Work-related expenses.
Gas, Airbnbs, the food you bought.
Air mattresses.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that all that money we did spend, we can at least get some of that back.
Because we did not make hardly anything on this tour. Which is fine because we did it mostly for the experience, but definitely save your receipts so that you can at least get that tax deduction.
Mm-hmm. I hope that our sharing our experience and our insights with you helps you or someone you know with their planning their tour or whatever comes next for them.
Yeah, if you are a classical musician or really any kind of musician and you've gone on tour and you have some tips of your own that you want to share with us, that maybe we didn't cover, leave them in the comments below. Yeah. Or if you have interesting tour stories, we'd love to head those too. And for a more in-depth conversation on exactly like day by day, like the events and adventures on our tour, head on over to our Patreon page. Patreon supporters get access to all that stuff.
Behind the scenes content.
Yeah.
Thanks for sitting with us and chatting. That's our little tour update, life update, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.